For an instructor who's just getting started with drawing to learn, how can they figure out what is a good fit?
It's hard for instructors. The research on this says it's hard for students to learn and it's hard for instructors to figure out how to teach. So the two suggestions I have, one is pick one thing that is really hard for students that you feel like, I just don't succeed at this, and see if you can turn it into sketches for yourself. And then refine those sketches and try them out with students. Just focusing on one thing that you already know you're not doing as well as you would like means, what have you got to lose? It's not going to be worse. That's one. The other is I've offered many times, and a few people have taken me up on it, to have people just come to me and say, hey, look, I've got this topic that students struggle with, or I want to learn how to do some of this drawing to learn stuff. Will you take the topic, make a video for me that I can have my students watch, and then walk me through how you did it, what the process is, and in some cases I've done repeats for them on other topics, and then I've also helped them figure out, okay, how would I do that for myself? I think this is one where having a coach really helps.
Does your coach need to be an artist, or can it just be like a thought partner from another discipline, or somebody?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I see that fear in faculty and students. Students, one of their biggest sources of resistance is, I can't draw, I'm not an artist. I cannot draw myself, and I am not an artist. And when students have that fear, all I have to tell them is, you're not an artist and you can't draw? Have you seen my videos? Because I'm terrible. Mine are a mess. And one of the points I make with students is, it only needs to make sense to you. There's a tremendous amount you can do with stick figures and blobs. In a Rate My Professor comment, one of my former students said, he makes a big deal about all this drawing stuff, but all of his drawings are circles. And the thing I loved about that comment was that the next person who commented clearly responded to that and wrote, you're supposed to know what the circles mean. Which is exactly the point. It isn't what it looks about.
There's not going to be a public gallery of these. Well, there might be now.
Fascinating twist to me. I had a student who was legally blind. He has nystagmus, in which your eyes cannot stay fixed in one spot. So they're always flicking around. And he really struggled as a student. And when he took my class, we tried all sorts of stuff to help him learn. We didn't spend much time on drawing to learn, because he could in theory draw, but he can't actually perceive his own drawings. He can't see them well enough to do it. So we tried a lot of other stuff. We tried visualization exercises. We tried non-visualization thought stuff. We tried having him move in hands in space. And he did improve. He got better in my class, but he still really struggled and wound up with a pretty low grade. And I kept working with him after that class. And he later was applying to grad schools, was interested in medicine. And he got back to me at one point and he said, I finally found what works, and it is drawing to learn. He said, what I came to realize was, I didn't need to be able to look at my drawings afterwards, because I knew what I was putting in. There's things I was shaping were in my head, and I didn't need to see them. And the fact that everybody else looks at them and says, it's a scribble, and it's just like every other drawing scribble that you make. There's no, other than it's a different scribble, there's no difference between them. But he said the drawing to learn actually was useful to him. And he said that was the point at which he started getting high enough grades to get him into the master's program he went into, and then make it through the master's program. So clearly, if he could do it, anybody could do it. His stuff was completely unrecognizable.
Okay, so to recap drawing to learn, anybody can do it. You don't have to be an artist. The value is really in synthesizing your own thinking and figuring out the sequence to how the information fits together.
That comes into practice when you're redoing your drawing to develop memory for it.
And then it may or may not be recognizable to anybody else. That's not really the point. It's really, the point is that it makes sense to you, and somewhat that the learning is happening in the process of creating the drawing. And then for instructors who are trying to get started with this and maybe can't immediately figure out how it applies to their discipline, it can be helpful to have a coach or a thought partner, and they should really feel free to start with a concept that's already muddy for their students, because what do they have to lose?
Yeah.
Okay.
I started drawing because one of my professors told me to do it. And initially it was really hard. And the thought partner piece that you mentioned, that was really important. 2 or 3 of us would get together and say, okay, I figured out how to draw this one, but I can't figure out how to draw this one. And by working with other people, we could get ideas, and somebody else would have figured out a way to draw it, and then we could refine it and make more sense. And that whole process, which initially to me felt like I'm wasting time just coming up with a drawing, later I started realizing, no, that's part of, just as you mentioned, that's part of the learning process, that trying to figure out how do I distill this concept into something I can represent on paper in the right sequence with only the necessary parts. That was a really important part of learning. And then understanding is separate from recalling. And it turns out practicing a minute sketch is really fast because you can reproduce it in 30 seconds or so. And each time you practice it from memory, you're developing memory. That's how we develop memory, is by retrieval practice. And one of the great things about drawing as opposed to visualizing is that in a drawing, you can look at it and compare it to a correct version, and you can see your errors. When you visualize, especially if you're sleep deprived, but when you visualize, it's really hard to notice errors. There's no good way to do that.
Yeah, and you mentioned your students sometimes using your videos on Blackboard in that way, is that they would pause it, see if they could sketch something, and then compare to what you had. So
And they quickly learn they do not have to follow the way I sketched it. So initially they sometimes start out with pretty close copies to what I sketched, and then I can tell they quickly figure out, okay, they don't need all the things I put in. I also tell them, if when you're practicing you realize there's some of it you don't need anymore because you just remember it so easily, leave it out that time. If you remember it that well, you probably don't need to practice it. In fact, you did practice it just by recalling it. You can leave it off the sketch and make your sketches even more efficient. I've had some students just save the first version and then the final version before the final exam of their sketches, just to look through how do they change. And what happens is they get simpler and simpler and simpler. You had the question about you have to be an artist. Here's another problem with drawing to learn. I've had artists who just couldn't do the simple version. They needed to do some beautiful artistic representation, which takes a huge amount of time. And it's actually, if you put that much time into it, you probably would have been just as well off studying some other way and not spending so much time. And for them, I tell them to do a Google search on Matisse or Picasso one-line drawings.
Okay.
Because they both had some fantastic examples of putting something down on the pen, on the paper, doing a single line, and in that single line evoking the essence of whatever it was, an animal, a human, whatever. And it's clearly really fast. You can look at them and go, yeah, they probably spent 10 seconds on this line. And I tell them that's what you're after. You're not trying to get a photorealistic illustration of what's going on. You're trying to do what they're trying to do, which is capture the essence of whatever this is, the essentials of whatever it is, in the fewest number of pen or pencil strokes.
So that's another, I guess, caution or guardrail with the drawing to learn strategy, is that if you are somebody who is very artistic and you can't resist those flourishes, you might be doing it wrong. You might need to simplify a little bit. And so those one-line drawings are a place to look. Okay, well, thank you for talking to us about drawing to learn.
You're welcome. Thanks very much for having me here.
So we hope you feel inspired to go out and change one thing in your teaching, and we want to hear from you. So please email us at stli@wm.edu. That's STLI@wm.edu if you would like to make an appearance here in Studio 36 or virtually in our virtual podcasting studio.